Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Rehema Barber, and I'm the Chief Curator at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here, albeit virtually. Um, and tonight we are here to listen to our special guest, Conrad Egyir. And let me tell you a little bit about him before we jump right into tonight's presentation. Conrad Egyir was born in Ghana and moved to the U.S. as a student, receiving his BA in studio art from Judson University in Illinois, and then receiving his MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art. Currently, Egyir is based in Detroit and is widely known for his bold and graphic portraits that blend iconography from contemporary American culture, biblical parables, and Ashanti storytelling from his native Ghana. Alluding to the old idiom, don't judge a book by its cover, Ajir's work explores the assumptions and presumptions we make when we look at others and attends to the themes of collective and individual identity of the African diaspora. His works are in the permanent collections of the Perez Art Museum, Miami, the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Rennie Collection in Vancouver, British Columbia, the J.P. Morgan Chase Art Collection, the Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine in Pasadena, California, the Cranbrook Art Museum in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and of course, right here in Kalamazoo at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. Egyir has been awarded residencies by the Vermont Studio Acre Residency, the Oxbow School of Arts, and the International Studio Curatorial Program, among other notable residencies and awards. In 2020, the artist enjoyed a solo show at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. And in 2021, he had a solo exhibition at UTA Art Space in Beverly Hills, California, and the Institute of Contemporary Art San Jose as part of their ongoing public art program, the Facade Project. He is currently represented by Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco, California. And after his presentation, he and I will be talking a bit more about his practice, and I'll also be asking him your questions. So as we listen this evening, please share them with us using the chat function. Without further ado, Kalamazoo and our guests online, please join me in welcoming our very, very special guest tonight, Conrad Egyir. Hi, Conrad.
Hi, Rehema. Thank you so much for having me. And first of all, I do want to thank the institution and then you for being in touch over the course of like a year now, and then making sure we went through the acquisition process, and then setting this presentation up and talk up. I really appreciate it.
Of
So
course. Thank you so much for coming. We really are happy to have you here, and we are even more so pleased to have a work of yours in our collection. So I'm going to hand it right over to you, and we'll jump right in, and then I'll see everyone else later.
thanks. So this is going to be like a little presentation on uh, my background and my full-time career here as an artist, especially in the Midwest. So I was born in Ghana in the late 80s, and for the first 2 decades of my life, I was in Ghana, and I came to the States in 2008. And this is the first image of me during my first year of Cranbrook. Uh, so I had my bachelor's of arts at Judson University, which is about 40 minutes away from Chicago. This is, I think, from 2011 to 2015. And I was also in the art program in high school, which is a boarding school back in Ghana, because the educational system was set up differently, where you were able to like be in a high school program. I thought you were in a college program here. So for 3 years in high school, I was in the visual arts department, and then I ended up pursuing the same uh, degree when I came to the States. Back then, the arts wasn't much of a respected field. But then, it grew on me much more when I came to the States, and I knew how much more I could further my education and my career. Uh, and then this is like one of those memes, like, how that we see online, like how it started and how it ended. So
Yeah.
this is like my scruffy self during my first year of Cranbrook, and then this is my thesis show, and I think this was like right before I had an interview with I believe the Detroit Press News. Uh, so talking about some of my influences, uh, Carol Marshall is a very big one who over the course of the years has been very motivational and influential in my work. I remember the first time I saw his retrospective in New York at the MoMA. I had to fly in one day and flew back out just so I could like get uh get a feel and scope of like uh his his practice. It was a retrospective, so I believe he had about like, over 50 works and paintings in this one show. So in undergrad and also in high school, I didn't learn much about art history, and like I had to pick up the steam while I was doing my graduate studies at Cranbrook, and that was one of the reasons why I had to be like very proactive and like stepping out of the way, going out to engage with the art world and see what was out there. So another one, and that's his work, by the way. And then Angelica Crosby, I think I'm butchering the name, but she is also like another influential artist that I look up to, Nigerian American.
We actually had some of her work here a couple of years ago as part of the Black Refraction show. So yeah,
Awesome.
very fun.
All right, and then we have Michelin Thomas. And like all these artists have specific elements or like practices in their work that make me much drawn to it. So hers, for example, is like her use of assemblages and like material, her material exploration with the crystals, the glitter, the collages. Carrigan Marshall is more for his storytelling, and so with Crosby. And then we have William Blake, I believe an 18th century poet, writer, and painter. Examples of his work. And then two photographers actually. So this being James Barno, who was a photographer and a filmmaker in the 90s in Ghana, but was also based in London. And getting towards the end of my graduate degree, I started like learning much more about his work and his use of photography, which became also influential in how I moved on with my practice over the course of like the next 2 years. So this is going back all the way to undergrad, before I started my life-size, full-scale oil paintings. I was primarily working with the charcoal medium, also thinking about stories and narratives that were being brought from historical and biblical, political, and like religious eruditions, and then like rendering them in a more contemporary fashion. So these are some self portrait studies that I was doing, and the other thing that I was also working on was using myself multiple times, or using a model or a subject multiple times in a composition, because I was running into the problem with me being the only black. Actually, that's like with me being one of the few black people in undergrad and in this like remote town away from Chicago. I didn't have much access to models who looked like me that I was comfortable working with, so I ended up like using myself, referencing myself multiple times in these competitions.
Wow.
And
And
then,
these are photographs that you did?
right, photographs that I did
Okay.
where I would have friends come in and sit and pose. And this would be the end result.
Got you. So these are really precursors to
Right.
the beginning of like how you are putting together your works now. I
Right.
really can see how you started. This is the very beginning, right?
Yes. So I mean, it's still relevant in my practice today. And one of like the underlying themes is like the sense of empathy. Because I remember when I came to the States in 2008, I had a hard time adjusting. I had this like very anti-social life. And there's this thing that we call the triple consciousness. It's just like the double consciousness where you feel out of place and out of pocket depending on like the geography or the circle of friends that you are in.
Right.
So with being a Black American, we relate much more to people in our circle as opposed to like others in a different circle, whether it's like in a corporate world or like in the field. But then with me, it was also interesting because I wasn't just a Black American, even though I naturalized uh, to become an American citizen in 2018. But prior to that, I still felt as though I was in an in-between hybrid space. There were times where I'll go back home to Ghana and then they'll call me an American. There are times where I'll be here and then even like my Black American friends will still identify me as an African. There wasn't any place that I could like comfortably call home. Like I
Right.
always felt as an outsider, even in my own circle of friends.
Would you say then that your work is sort of embodies this sort of in-betweenness, this idea of like
Absolutely.
liminal space?
Absolutely.
I mean, but like when we've heard about liminal space is really, not in terms of like the physicality of a person, right? Like you're talking about like feeling like where is there a place for you?
Mhm.
But I think with your images, you start to make room for yourself, right?
I start to make room for myself, and in doing that, I also drive home the point of thinking about the differences and similarities between the image and the self, and how all these multiple characters, even though they are in one composition, they all bear the same likeness of one image, but then they are different personalities. So it behooves the viewer to step into the shoes of these multiple characters at the same time, where a father could be seen also as a son or like a friend, as a foe. These are different people, but then like they all bear the same image. So like, what does that conversation look like, and how do we define? Uh, talk about some of these uh, themes of empathy and people in the diaspora, and like immigration and whatnot. So like that was also a piece from undergrad. But moving on, so this is like I think my first major painting that I did in grad school, Cranbrook. Again, all these are self-portraits
Okay.
of.
And I mean, I also think that, you talked about this idea of your sense of self having sort of this triple consciousness. I mean, that also has to be very complicated, a complicated space to navigate and then sort of, work it out in the 2D space,
Yes.
right? So can you talk about so looking at an image like this, I mean, like this is really like it kind of reminds me a little bit of that Eakins painting where they're all at all of the graduates are looking and they're teaching the anatomy lesson, right? But this right here is like,
Right.
okay, I'm gonna sew you up and you see the sort of sutures right there. That's
Right.
nice that you did this close-up shot. So like this idea of being dissected and then also having all of those different people
Right.
in the same space with you, but also trying to figure out a way to coexist.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like putting yourself on the examining table, and like
Yeah.
analyzing or like psychoanalyzing what it is that you do, and like how you perceive yourself versus like how others perceive you. So like that's where most of that comes from, and then that's how I often use multiple characters in some composition to drive home that question.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then these is more samples from my graduate studies.
I'm really struck by like the different sort of tones that I see in your work. Like you clearly have skill with paint and pencil and can render human beings like very much lifelike. But you choose these sort of tones that are very different. That maybe sometimes evoke skin, but not quite. So
Right.
can you talk about because I see that starting here. So can you talk about that just a little bit in these?
Yeah, I'm so disappointed that I didn't add that to the slides. I have over like 200 images, and I had to chop some out. But then there were these. Let me see if it's. No, I took it out. But then there were these 4 particular paintings that were in a conversation to this definition of blackness, so to speak, because it wasn't a word that we often use back home in Ghana, because everyone around you was black. We weren't referring to ourselves as black. But then it became much of an identity problem for me when I came to the States. So after going to see Curtis Marshall's show in New York, and I believe 2016, 17, either the fall or the spring of
Hmm.
yeah, I came back uh very very enlightened, but at the same time troubled because I was also grappling with like how I define myself as a black person, and it was a very unsettling word for me back then. But anyway, I decided to like just deconstruct colorism. So I had these
Mm.
four portraits, one being and I think we can see. Let's see if I go back. All right. So the father's character, and these are also portraits. The father's character on the left has this pigment called Indian red, which is straight
Mm.
out of the tube, and that's what the name of the tube is. And
Gotcha.
then the character in the middle is I believe a very dark, rich brown tone, burnt umber. And
Mm.
then the character on the right is basically an albino, like a very light
Mm.
skinned African. So like I
Hmm.
had this series of portraits that were questioning like what blackness meant. Like if you were to see an albino in Africa, and you were to define them by their color, would you call them a white person, or are they still black? Like
Mm.
how are we defining this and approaching this?
Wow.
So that's why I was like sticking to these specific colors to you know
And then, even within the Black communities here in the United States, there is a sense of colorism. Like when you said colorism, I
mhm.
said, oh, wow, that's been a long standing sort of interest of mine as far as research, because there are just so many. When you said Indian red, I was like, oh gosh, you hear about Redbone, or
Exactly. Exactly.
like just different things. There are different artists like Carrie May Weems that have looked at the idea of the sort of varying skin tones
Hmm.
within the African American community and how that has played out, sometimes publicly and privately, right?
Right.
I mean, and there's lots of literature too, because I know you're a huge fan of reading. You're a voracious reader. So you have to talk about how you inject that into your work later. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, there's a whole genre of that in during the Harlem Renaissance, where people were talking about this sort of struggle with double consciousness and
Right.
colorism, and
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So like a lot of that came up during my graduate studies, and like and I think it was at that point where I realized I had to like create a unique voice of my own because most of the narratives surrounding like Black American art were primarily about the color. I mean, like there were much more in depth like narratives being built, So, but like the overarching or like mainstream, like worldview was just basically about the skin tone and the
Mm.
deconstruction of the skin tone and what we were seeing, regardless of like how spiritual or political the narratives were, like beneath the surface of these stories. But I didn't want to like deal in such with such politics, But
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk about it like later on as we go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. But going back, while I was also working with the medium of like oils and acrylics, I also started using assemblages with acrylics and like also including text into my my repertoire. And then I also started exploring with like certain artifacts from back home, like uh, Akan, AKAN, which is like a nation or tribe in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
Akan, flip flops, royal sandals, combs, stools, and then these are some examples of that.
Mm-hmm. I want to say we may have some con
I
things on view in
I believe we do.
the Africa
I believe
Imagine
we do.
show.
And here's a mural I did in the Belt in downtown Detroit.
I have seen this in
Right.
person, and it is fabulous. Everyone must go and see
Mhm.
it. It is a must. If you're going to Detroit, go and see that work. It's beautiful.
Thanks, thanks. So one thing I think I want to be talking a lot about is this idea of crowns and like these regalia or ornaments that we adorn ourselves with, and I think this might be the first piece that I have that the character on the sitting up top on the left has this crown that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of slides.
Mm.
So again, here we have James Bano, who was also someone I was focusing on during my graduate studies, and these are some of his portraits that he did in the 90s in Ghana.
Oh, I love that piece there. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Again, these are portraits of portraits that James Banner was taking back in the
Mhm.
day. So this it made me think about like our individual family archives that we all have. Where I remember when I was here, I was working mostly from memory because I hadn't been back to Ghana in like 11 years. So most of
Oh.
the ideas and stories and narratives that I was coming up with like were mostly from memory. So I came to the States to Michigan, and I didn't know I had family here. My mom didn't tell me that I had family like a lot up north. So I was here for like almost 2 years in school, and then like right after coming out, I learned that I had this family, uncles, cousins, aunties, whatnot. And I was pretty like mad at my mom, like why she would keep that away from me. But anyway, I had a visit with them, and like I was going through some of their archives, and it reminded me of like some of the research I was doing with James Banner's work, where like going through this like historical black and white poetry chapters, like look at how artists were thinking about poses, were thinking about their subjects in a very not necessarily grandiose way, but
Mm.
putting them on a what do you call it? Look for a better word.
Maybe elevating them to,
Elevated.
yeah,
Yeah.
elevating them to show their real character,
Right.
their humanity.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are some grand angles that I have on my left.
To Dapper Dance.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other photographer that I was also looking at was Paul Strand, an American photographer uh, whose work is from the 20th century,
Hmm.
who's also a filmmaker and a photographer. So he went to Accra and had his photograph, and I thought this photo belonged to James Banner because I didn't know that there were white people, or like people from the West who were also going there and like having these uh, uh, photograph like archival documentations happening. So I was really surprised, and like I really started looking and paying much attention to Paul Strand's work. And then this photo stood out to me because it reminded me of like my time back home as a little kid, where we had to like trek miles to school, sometimes without a backpack, and what we end up doing is like carrying our entire like school like in a parts on our head. So that this photograph in particular really like struck a sweet spot
Oh,
in my
wow.
heart. And then here's a postage stamp made in honor of that
Mm,
photograph.
it's lovely.
And these
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so all just like bring back memories of like how we were
But
commuting
then
back to
too,
school.
also just thinking about how what that means. It's also a symbol of resilience in some way, right? I mean, and the idea is that, despite any challenge, that you would persevere and say, okay, I'm going to do this by any means
Hmm.
necessary. And there's beauty in that, and
Right.
it's powerful.
Right, and it was the norm. It wasn't like we knew any other like better alternative. It was something that most of us like were thrilled to do, you
Hmm.
know. But like now, looking back and having like a much better, I wouldn't say much better life here in America, because that's subjective. But pursuing, because my parents were here before I came, but pursuing this higher education and like and being grateful for the that I guess the higher education here and the amenities and like the lifestyle and the culture, it makes me think about my upbringing back home and some of the things that I missed, some of the things that I think now were a struggle back then that I didn't think were a struggle while that was happening.
Mm.
Because again, it was all part of life. It was normal, it was something that we all enjoy doing. Uh, but then yeah, like with this photo and like the one before, this is something we're doing like every day.
Wow.
Carrying buckets of water, especially like for houses and homes that had no no running water. We had to go, down by the riverside and grab buckets and loads of water
Wow.
day on and day out. So there's this thing about like learning how to like balance your head with like these objects.
Hmm.
In a way, it becomes this uh
It's a talent,
it's
though.
a talent, right? And then
Yeah.
this is me like last year, actually early this year when I was in a remote village, doing the same thing. And I was surprised that I was able to pull it off, but it was a big struggle because I thought I would like just pick up right back where I left, but in my head it was wobbling the whole time. But it reminded me of like this series. So I decided to like work on uh, similar portraits. This is my studio assistant, and I had two last summer who were helping me out with a couple of shows that I was doing. So going back to Paul Strand's image, I decided to like work on a series, and I think that is what you guys decided to acquire, and then we're going to like talk about that in a little bit. So that is the my friend, the subject of
Yeah.
that painting that the Kalamazoo Institute of Art currently has in the acquisition. Her name is Irving, and the title of the painting is Irving's Class.
Okay. And you totally, I love that you also kind of changed the colors
Yes.
that
Hmm.
she's wearing, right? I mean,
Yes.
um it's very evocative, just this sort of juxtaposition of color and how you inject elements that aren't necessarily in the photos
Right.
themselves.
Right. I do have a lot of fun doing that with some of the stages in the practice. Initially, I'll come up with a narrative. I'll invite a model to come sit. I'll tell them to bring maybe like multiple clothes or attires. Uh, and then what makes it make sense is like the final result of like the editorial phase. If the colors that I bring into the studio or the shoot that doesn't make sense, I end up taking my, like the liberties of like tweaking them in Photoshop and seeing how they will look cohesively as a whole. So that's where some of this color variation comes from. And then we're going to be going through some slides that also talk like go through the color palette phases
Okay.
for some more history references.
That's a nice one too.
Yeah.
So when you were doing the Irving's class one, I want to say that the one that we have has a little. Can you talk about those sort of little elements that you have? This one has a moire. The one we were just seeing was Vita. Um, the one we were just seeing was called Vita.
Mhm.
Had Vita in it, which means
Right.
life. So can you talk about the tabula? Why did you choose the tabula affinitatum? Oof,
Yeah,
that's a
tablet
word.
affinitation. Like I'll probably like have to look at the app right now because I do deal a lot with language, and it's coming from this hypothesis, the sci-fi Wolf hypothesis, I believe, and I think I'm butchering the name, but it's this notion that culture involves that culture is like language informs culture and also culture informs language. So when you think about language, you often think about in a linear fashion, but then with this hypothesis, it's like a circulation of like how imagine what came first, like the egg or the chicken. So like I often use language to help inform the work. Uh, and then I either recycle through English or like my native language or certain like Latin phrases and like proverbs that I often use in the work. So let me slide through this real quick. Yeah, so here are some of the regalia that I was talking about.
Oh wow, it's beautiful.
And
And this is in your studio.
and this is in my studio, and like this is one of the biggest, I think, the tallest piece I did that is also going to be part of this conversation about crown. So this is a friend of mine, a Detroit native, uh, and then she's also holding this book that I acquired last summer. I think among about 200 books that I got in just one sitting because I went over to a model's house and I was very interested in what they were reading. So I acquired all these books, and like one of the books that I found was this book titled Crowns.
Mhm.
Just again going back to like the regalia that we wear or that we have on our heads in certain cultures. Uh, and so the title of this painting is "Above your head I hold a crown, and I challenge you to grow into it and wear it."
That's beautiful. And then along the side are those Barrier BG
Yeah,
figures?
those are Equiaba dolls.
Oh, Cura.
Fertility dolls.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. And this was actually an exhibition that traveled around the country many years ago.
Ah.
Crowns. Yes, I remember it when I was a baby curator.
I see. And again, like some studio shots of like how big some of
Yeah.
these species are.
Wow.
And this was Again, talking about the same hypothesis I just mentioned. This is made for an offer, the Meridians Project in Art Basel 2021.
Hmm.
And I know we have about 5 minutes left, but I do want to slide through something real quick to show like a quick brief.
Oh no, we have more
Yeah.
than enough time. We're good.
So this is a quick example of like the process where I pull from historical references, one being a contemporary reference and the other being like a very much uh, uh, further back historical piece. The painting on the left is by William Adolphi, with two main characters, one being the father and the son,
Hmm.
uh, and then the one on the right is Carriage's Marshall.
Hmm.
Uh, and then out of that comes the synthesis
Oh
of
wow.
four subjects all bearing the same image.
Hmm.
And again, this is another one. The painting on the left by Paul Gervais, titled "Dura Lex Lex," which is Latin for "How does the law, but it is still the law." And then
Hmm.
the photograph on the right is from the I think the title of it is "The Last Jew in Vienista,"
Oh wow.
and then the title of the synthesis that I made out of that is "The Last Brother in America," combining those two images. And so again, these are some color palette choices and like iterations that I have, or I
Hmm.
recycle through, switch things up, and then the final painting.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. I like how your references are so far and wide. You know, like there really is a universality to them. While you really are many of your subjects and most of your subjects at this moment have been uh, of African descent, representing the African diaspora. I think it's really important to see how your images have been informed by various other images and artists throughout history. I mean, like you aren't just quoting, 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're looking way
Really
far
back.
back.
Right, right.
Yes. And this image here, can
And
you
this
talk about
image
this?
here, my fingers were moving way much faster. But
Okay.
then, like, this is another example of like the research that I do. I think back in 2018, I was focused on like this stereotypical narrative of like the absentee black father,
Mm.
which reminded me of the absence of Joseph in the biblical narrative that we know of, like the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus.
Yeah.
And then there are these series of paintings titled uh, the Annunciation. And when you
Hmm.
Google this up, the Annunciation comes up with these images where it's only the angel and Mary. Obviously, that's how the story goes. So like the paintings like do it justice. But then with my take on it, I was just trying to question like why the absence of Joseph, or like what the absence of Joseph like dash to especially like in a Black American culture. How does that help shape or alleviate the stereotypical narrative that we have of our own family structure?
Mm.
So here was a contemporary rendition of that, and this is the family that I decided to work with. The father, the son, and the mother. And then here are some. I'm gonna slide through this really quick. So I come up with a narrative. I tell them what it's gonna be about, and I have them sit through a couple of poses and phases, and then everything gets thrown into like a digital canvas.
Hmm. Okay.
Right.
I really love that you're taking myself and the audience through like the like a whole sort of sequence
Hmm.
to see like from the beginning to the end. You do the whole sort of, I mean, like there's a huge tradition in photography with portraiture, and you've been talking about some photographers that certainly we may or may not be known to us. And then what you then do is take that and then do in your own, and then in some way, it's almost like you were talking about assemblage earlier with
Right.
Michelin Thomas.
Hmm.
You take that and then make these paintings that then become in their various ways these assemblages. Um, and I love being able to see that sort of, that line by line process. It's really, really incredible.
Thanks.
Okay, you stopped here and you're showing us some things
Right.
here.
This is, I think these are, no, not thing. These are the objects that you were asking earlier about
Oh
that
yeah.
were on the side of like that painting title above your head that hold the crown. So these are a Cuba fertility dolls, and every tribe or most of the Akan tribes or families have their own unique shapes. So you can tell by looking at some of these dolls, what family this doll comes from or what tribe that doll belongs to.
Got you.
Uh,
Nice.
so again, I was using these as like some assemblages to like reinform the work or like add an extra layer of the work to make it look like a visual journal, like a notepad with the ribbons on the side, or like a postage stamp or a postcard. That all talk about the visual metaphor for migration. That I've been adding
Mm.
to the work lately.
And what's interesting too about when you think about a postage and stamps and postcards are, they really are mementos of our time in different places, and we send them to loved ones and friends, so that they almost as a way to sort of bring them to
Yes.
us
Hmm.
and also to bring ourselves to them. So there's this like sort of exchange, from
Absolutely.
wherever you are to wherever they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so this is another series of work
This is
that
another
you're
series. I
working.
think this will be like the last process series we're gonna go through.
Okay. Hmm.
So after the photo shoot, everything gets compiled on a digital canvas,
Hmm.
and then I work with some color iterations, and then we can see how I'm using these like Ikebana dolls that are going to be added to the side of the canvas. And this is my studio, the 10 feet tall painting.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you just said a 10-foot tall painting.
Correct.
And for everyone out there, he is a tall gentleman, but he is not 10 feet tall. Are
I'm
you
not.
standing on like a ladder or something like that? Oh my
Yeah.
God. How are you doing that? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna end with that specific painting. But yeah, that is I'm trying to see. Right. So like there are multiple things going on. Like one being the narrative, the working with the different skin tones, working with the scales and size of like the subjects themselves. Because back home we have this spiritual like a mythology or fable. Some believe is actually true that these creatures, so to speak, are still present and around, but we call them motia. These are about
Mm.
like 2 feet tall creatures that are imbued with like spiritual powers that often help civilians through the like day-to-day lives and their like spiritual journeys. Some of them are often mischievous, and some of them have like a very positive connotation attached to them.
Mm.
But that's where like my work with scale often comes from. So like I work with a variation of skin tones, I work with the variation of scale, and then I also like add in different elements, physical elements to like go beyond the conventional uh, ideas of what a painting or a painting is supposed to look like. Uh, and that has been like the evolution of the work so far, and that's how like the language also evolved into it, and then you guys were very interested in it and also like very key on acquiring that specific painting that had the text and had the extra elements to it that made it look like a postcard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that we're almost coming to the question and answer period. Do you have some more images you want us to see,
Oh, there's
or?
like 1,000 images on
Oh,
that.
he has 1,000
No, I'm
images
just
for us.
kidding.
I was just kidding. Okay.
But yeah, here are some more.
Nice. Hmm.
Again, we see the tabs on the end of the painting that make it look like book tabs
Right.
for pages that you normally like place behind.
Yeah. Wow.
So we have the photograph, the studio shot, on the right, the digital rendition on the left, and the actual painting.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And can you talk about as far as people come to your studio and they are, do you tell them to dress a certain way? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, most of the time it's a very tasking thing to come up with a narrative, like find the right person or find the right family to come and sit in and then do these like specific poses. But then there are times where I try to like have a little fun in the studio. I might invite people over and then like just go through something random, and then see what comes out of like the randomness, And I'm talking
Hmm.
about random photo shoots. So there are times where I'll be very specific as to what they can bring to the studio, and there are times where it's like it's all open game. They can come in with whatever they want, and then we just have a good time, talk, and I get to like know much more about them, uh, and then work from there.
Yeah. I see this is a lot of work. And can you tell us about the time frame that it takes to do these paintings? Like a lot of these paintings feel like they're newer paintings, Mr.
Right.
Egyir. I have been to your studio a couple of times, and every time there's work on the walls, and it is in progress. And I'm just kind of amazed to see some of these works that look new, and some of them that I'm sure are not. So
Right.
could you tell us, give us a range of some of the works that you were showing us? I know you showed some early work, but
Hmm.
some of these are newer too, right?
Yeah, the duration. Yeah, all these are. I think most of these in the maybe like the last 40 slides were work that were made last year.
Okay.
Uh, the duration of them, I think the research part of it takes up most of the time. It could be anywhere from like a month or two, maybe to three, and then the painting is really quick.
Hmm.
The painting, say maybe like a 6 by 5 size painting. After all the research is done, and after I'm very certain of like the color choices and the color palette and like what I'm going to be slapping on there in terms of assemblage later on, the paintings could take anywhere from maybe 4 days with no sleep to maybe like a week and a half or
Oh my
two tops.
goodness.
But then there's a time where you have to also sit with the painting,
Yeah.
and then that could take like a day or like a month. Because
Yeah.
even after the painting is done, I try to be very careful of like making sure I feel confident about it before it goes out of the studio. Because the minute it's out of the studio, I wouldn't have the luxury of fixing it in an exhibition or a gallery.
That's right. That's
So
right.
like I've been very close to like these what do you call it, uncomfortable situations where because of like the demand, which is great. Uh, I try to cut it.
It's a thin line. It
It is.
is. And I'm glad to hear you say that, like, once it goes out of the studio, you really can't even control how people perceive
Right.
it,
It becomes a
right?
thing on its own.
It's not only about quality, making sure that it just represents you and the work that you've committed so much time and
Hmm.
energy to creating, but then you also are making sure it's ready to be seen.
Absolutely.
Like, and ready to be seen isn't just about the craft of it. It's like
Hmm.
when you talked about just a moment ago and said that there are spirits that may be a little mischievous,
Right.
or that are helping daily lives. I thought to myself, okay, if you're doing paintings so quickly, you definitely are having
Yeah.
a little help from some of those spirits.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, there's something very much there's a sacredness that I feel that's a part of the images too that I see. Can you talk about that a little bit, or did I just put you on the spot? I'm sorry.
No, you did. No, which is
Okay.
great. But like, I want to hear more about like how you define the sacredness in terms of.
I mean, it's just like when you look at the people,
Hmm.
there is something very much, and it goes back to what you were saying about how you felt that one photographer that he just elevated
Right.
people. That to me feels sacred.
Hmm.
And it's also just the idea of really capturing the someone's essence, that
Hmm.
I can look at that and say, wow, that is a powerful person. Or, man, that day, I can see that day that maybe that was a struggle. Or,
Right.
like, I think that you happen to not just pose people, but I think there's something that happens in the process that's very sacred.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's more about sometimes telling a story with less, because there are
Mm,
times where like I'm very cryptic, and like the work is dense with like multiple narratives. I enjoy those too, and there are times where I enjoy the single portraitures where I often focus on the tensions of the eye, the slight gestures of the hand that tell a whole lot just from like just like having a subject sit. Uh, so that's what that comes from. Just like learning how to like make a composition full with like a thousand layers of like different narratives, and also like balancing that with other works and other paintings that say much more with less,
hmm
with and that's what like I think James Banner and like some of the other photographers that I was influenced with like achieve a lot, and that's where the influence comes from. So
hmm Okay, and so you have a new image here that you have of two little ones that came to visit you, maybe
right.
in the studio.
Right, these are some Detroit natives. Their dad is a good friend and a collector, and I think we were friends all the way from Cranbrook. He came by to see some of the work, and then like we established a good relationship. But then every now and then he would come through the studio with his kids, his daughters, and they become good friends of mine. So like that was just like a last slide and the last photo to
Okay.
put a good
It's a good
tracking.
it's a good ending and it's happy. I mean, I think that and I love how they somehow also have colors on that are in your paintings.
Yeah.
That is very fortuitous. So just listening to you talk, I really was struck by, again, like I said, the process of, I mean, there's a labor intensiveness that I don't think that you talked about that I would, if you don't mind me ask you to sort of expound upon a little bit. And then I'll also encourage our viewers to send in their questions. If you haven't already been sending questions in, we will be answering questions now. So if you can send those to us, we'll get those questions answered. But to my question.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of labor, I think I do enjoy it. There are times where it's very tedious, but I think that's all part of the experience, and that is all part of the practice. There are times where I do know I can make shortcuts and like cut certain corners, but then like it often affects the quality of the work, the narrative of the work. It's also like writing a book, or
Mm,
like being a movie, a film writer or director. It takes time. Like there are times where some of these bodies of work will probably be maybe like a year or two of just like thinking about it, even before the research, like the in-depth research. And then there are some postures that are very quick, but I do enjoy how, I wouldn't say like labor intensive if it is, but I do enjoy the sweat that comes out of it, because then it makes the end result much more fruitful to enjoy and sit with, and like appreciate more so than I would say maybe like the works that require much less effort and energy and time into it.
gotcha. Okay, I have a question that I'm gonna get to from the audience, but I have one other question that kind of occurred to me. Um, we touched on this just really quickly about the literary references in the work, but I'm curious: are there any reasons why you selected certain titles to go in certain works, or are they picked sort of by chance, or is it?
It's very random. Most of the time I pick words from certain songs, certain sermons, certain lectures, talks, or things that I read that stand out. Like uh, imagine reading something and like picking up a line and thinking about how you could like paint or create a narrative from like a single phrase. So like there are certain like account proverbs, and it was an oral culture and an oral tradition that I grew up with. So it was oral and visual as much as opposed to just like writing like the West does, and how like they documented their history. But words play a big part of my work, and like phrases and proverbs and idioms. So most of the time that will come first before the painting comes. I have this like one line or idea in a phrase or a song, and there are times where the painting comes first and like the language comes afterwards.
Okay.
So it's like a very circular, like one informed the other in a very like
Got you.
revolutionary
Yeah,
cycle.
absolutely. Okay, so we have a question that says we have a lot of questions, so you've got quite a bit to answer. What would be one of the greatest struggles you faced as an artist, and how, if any, does it influence your artwork?
Greatest struggles, and how does that influence my artwork?
If it does, I
Right.
mean, like,
Hmm. I would say I don't know if I'll call it a struggle. It is a struggle, but it's speaking to the times,
hmm
speaking to the times, and like making sure the work isn't only speaking to like one specific time in the history, but it has like a very much long lasting impression. Uh, for me, for my family, for my friends, for culture, for society, because I think that's like how important like art should be.
hmm
Where it isn't just like necessarily made for the market, but it has like a long lasting narrative. I did it maybe with Curtis Marshall, my influencer, like 2 years ago for the first time, and one of the words, one of the things that he said to me that stood out was making sure that the artist's work was transformational. And I asked him about that word, like what does transformational mean? And he talked about like the copious or like plethora of art out there right now today. That probably like about 99% of them like don't stand the test of time. And like
Mm,
how you can walk up to a painting and like just it could be beautiful, it could have glitter all over it, but like at the end of the day, how substantial is it? Like, is it speaking to your soul?
mm.
So I see a lot of things happening in the art market, and I try not to get like too sweet away with it by comparing myself to like what sort of art styles are picking up steam and like what is selling, what is not selling. I just try to stick with like the narratives and like how long lasting I believe they're gonna be. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm going to say that goes into the sacredness that I was talking about
Hmm.
too. When you said talking about the soul,
Hmm.
I have, has your work been seen in Ghana? And how do your parents feel about your career now?
Uh, That's my work been seen in Ghana. I do have friends who like know of my work thanks to like social media, but like I haven't had an exhibition or show there yet. I'm trying to set up a studio there now, so it's a goal of mine to like show there. But I'm just mindful of some of the galleries because we have some like foreign outsider galleries who are established like in the capital city and like in other places. But again, I don't want to like go into the politics of like whether
Yeah.
but I will do one
One
day.
day, one
Yeah.
day. Okay. And how did the parents feel?
Uh, fortunately enough, I had parents who were very supportive from the beginning. But then outside of my family structure, because like back home they say like it takes a village to raise a child. So like I had multiple parents, so to speak.
Yes.
But then like outside of like the nuclear family, I don't think everyone else was that much supportive of it. I didn't feel that right away, but like in culture or like in Ghana per se, like none of them really cared about the arts like that. My family were somewhat indifferent to it, but then there are times where they were supportive. And then once things started picking up with like my graduate school and like seeing how things were going, they were like, "Oh, like you stuck with this through and through, and we are glad we did." And you know, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a blessing to have like the support.
So they saw you grow, and that's what they cared about. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
awesome. I have a question that says, do you collect research prior to all paintings, or do you even create something, then give it a story? So does it all start with research, or is there a time when you just say, you know what, I want to make this painting, and then,
It all starts with research. It all starts with like some of the things or like the stories that I want to paint. Like it will come from being offered an exhibition. So I think about the exhibition as like a cohesive body of like works that all make sense together. So that would be like the grand narrative,
Mhm.
and then that's where like the research comes in before the paintings. There are times where I might just be scrolling online and see like I was doing with James Bonner. Like I just this constant like scrolling of like well that could be part of the research, but there are times where I just like catch things on the fly just randomly, and that piques my interest, and I'll pay attention to like how some of these like photographs are taken, how the like the models are set. I'm like, I can see how I can work with that. So like
Okay.
those are also like interesting random
Yeah.
prior to
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So it all starts at research, but like sometimes there are, some impromptu influences, but then you go and research.
Then yes, research yourself.
Okay. Okay, and then we have one another question. I think I'm going to have to close. If there's a question and you didn't get it answered, you've got another minute. How do you choose what book titles, or how did you choose what book titles to use in the series with Irving's class? So I know you said that they were random before, but it's so funny. Even with our painting Irving's class, there are a lot of Detroit references, and even in preparation for, acquiring your work for the KIA, I listened to Dapper Dan's autobiography.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I did. It was wonderful. I really appreciated it.
Right.
I do my research too.
Yes, you do.
And it was really fascinating. I mean, and he talked about going to Detroit. He is not just he's from New York, but he's been in other cities. So I'm really curious too, like, about that.
So like these are some of these book choices are like even again, because the titles on the book also like influence or like help shape the narrative of the work. There are only like a select few times that are random, because I leave that chance up to the model for them to like go through the books or like bring a book of their own that they're reading that they're interested in. But then there are times where if I'm the one, making these decisions, I try to make sure that the subject, or like where they're from, like where they were born, or where's their interest, like match like some of the books in my own personal library. So like with Irving's class, for example, like Irving is from Chicago.
Yeah.
But then she often comes here to see work, or like to work on like farms. I think they have some communal farms around here.
That's right.
Right. So like this book was I think the Detroit Research on Dance was like the first book that was close to us, like in that proximity, like while we were working, and she was glancing through it, and then I decided to work with that. And then also she had like a very great sense of fashion.
Okay.
And then in the same proximity, I had like a Dapper Dance book there, so it was a perfect match for that photo shoot.
Yeah. And then even just those sort of Detroit references. Well, I think that we have to close. Wow, I could talk to you. I could talk to you forever.
Oh, yeah, we could, yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. This has been an artful evening with Conrad Egyir here at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you, to see how you were inspired to create, and we're excited to see what's next. And you know what? I didn't get to ask you about Black is King.
Oh
my goodness. Yeah. Okay, so I get to hear it before. I think I got a thumbs up because everybody wants to know what about Black is King. So tell us a little bit about that really quick. And then I'll say good night to everyone again.
What year was this? It's like 2 years ago or a year ago?
Yes, it happened 2 years. So you said over a course of a year. I was like, no,
right.
This is 2 years.
So this is a live movie adaptation of the classic Lion King series that featured Beyonce. And I remember like 2 summers ago, all of a sudden I had my phone like blowing up. I knew about this project after I did a painting for a show in San Francisco. Like the gallery reached out saying, hey, so Beyonce is interested in this piece. They want to acquire it for a music video. I'm thinking it's going to be like a 3-minute video. I didn't know it was that grand. It was going to be like this big project on like Blackness, So about 2 summers ago, like my phone started blowing up. I'm like, what is going on? And I looked, and people were talking about this documentary that just came out. And I think what made it much more interesting for me was the fact that I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know all the details. So it was a very nice surprise because I totally forgot about it. And what's interesting is that same painting was already sold and like bought by a client who was willing to like lend it, but then I think that's when COVID hit. So like there was the whole logistics problem of like moving it.
Yeah.
But Beyonce's team could have just like easily asked for another painting. But they were interested in that specific painting because they realized that it made a much bigger impact in that scene or like that part of the documentary that they were trying to tell. So I thought that was very like heartwarming for me, that the work that I would do like years later will have that lasting impact. And it's been an interesting ride. Like I hardly listen to like Beyonce. I hardly listen to like hip hop. There are certain like specific genres that I listen to that help me in studio.
Yeah.
And I've been a fan ever since, and I appreciate the amount of exposure and support, the support systems like the galleries, the institutions that have offered in placing these works strategically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, on that note, I want to thank you uh, for this talk. I want to thank you for the acquisition. I want to thank you for the relationship, as a curator, between an artist, and I think that's very insightful and helpful. And
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone again this evening for joining me, for tuning in, listening to Conrad talk about his work. I am thrilled to have had you here today, and that we have a work in our collection. It's fantastic, and it does touch the soul. I can't tell you how many people that I've seen in this moment stand in front of that painting and really, they don't even look at the label. I've written such a long label. They don't even look at it. They just look, and it's so lovely to see how curious people are about it and how they are taking it all in. And I applaud you and thank you for your time and efforts and energy and talents. And I thank the audience tonight for joining us. We have lots more programs just like this. So please continue to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, if you want to see Irving's class, you have to come tomorrow, which is Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because after that, it's going to go away for a little bit and we're going to put it back in the vault, but you will see it again. I am very sure you'll see it again, but you only have 3 days left, 3 days. So thank you so much for joining us. We thank all of our sponsors and whatnot that do these programs for us today. And we will say, see you soon and good night.